finish up the book of Ruth. Last week, anybody can remind me what happened?
Naomi had a plan. We followed it and laid at Boaz's feet. He blessed her, he protected her, and the plan continues.
That's right. They plotted against Boaz. Poor Boaz did not have a chance. And all, and so she laid at his feet and asked him to put her covering. You know, we talked about the hem of the garment. She was asking him to basically bring her under his protection. You know, and so she essentially proposed to Boaz. You know, because Boaz probably would not have done that himself. You know, being an older than her, and would not have taken that step, because he probably would have thought that would have been inappropriate. But Ruth comes along and proposes, and he moves into action. So now we have Naomi and Ruth are back at home, and they're waiting. You know, and so we didn't look at these scriptures last week. We kind of ran out of time, but I wanted to just look at a couple of these. You know, we're not a waiting people. We do not like to wait. You know, so we find it hard. We like fast foods. We like immediate gratification. You know, so sometimes it's difficult for us to wait. So, but you know, Psalms tell us there are some value in waiting. It says. Psalms 37 says, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently. Do not fret." Anybody in here fret? Are you fretters? We do a lot of fretting. Okay. And it says that in this little verse, says twice, "Do not fret." That's one thing that you need to really be careful not to fret. A lot of times when we're fretting, we are creating in our mind scenarios that may not ever happen. And probably will not ever happen. And that's what we do when we fret. So the psalmist is correctly telling us not to fret. And then he says, "Wait for the Lord, for they will inherit the land." Remember we talked about one of the things in this book is land. Everything in this book is revolving around the land. And so today we're going to be talking about inheriting the land. Ruth and Naomi is going to inherit the land. You know, and then it says again in Psalms 37:34, "Wait for the Lord; He will exalt you to inherit the land." And then Isaiah, everybody's probably heard this one. "Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not be weary." So sometimes it's good to wait. Fortunately for Ruth, though, she didn't have to wait very long. I mean, where we left Ruth and last week was this. Ruth went to the threshing floor that night, proposed to Boaz. Boaz says, "Okay, I'll do it." without hesitation. And so, we'll get there in a minute, but just kind of remember our outline. Started off with Ruth's predicament, being widowed in Moab, no visible means of support. So they decide to go back to Israel. Ruth makes this great promise in chapter 1, probably one of the most beloved sections of Scripture. And then Ruth's toiling in the fields, gleaning. We talked about, you know, some of the history behind that and all. Last week was Ruth's plea to Boaz. And this week, we're going to be doing Ruth's promotion. These are some of the themes that we talked about in the book of Ruth. You know, redemption, restoration, grace, loyalty, love, and once again, the land. We talked about the purpose, you know, what was so important about little section of land and where it was located and how God's eyes have always been on that land. He calls it the beautiful land and a land that God loves. And then the progress through the book, we talked about that. And it started out in tragedy, and then there was a time of trials and tribulation. There was a time of testing, which we saw in chapters 2 and chapter 3, where we're testing of Ruth. And now we're in that period of tension. We don't know what's going to happen because there's another relative involved in this thing, and we don't know what's going to happen. Is Boaz going to win the day, or is the other relative going to redeem Ruth? So, and then today and before we're going to see Ruth's triumph. Remember we talked about the law of the kinsman redeemer, and this is why we talked about all the kinsman redeemer, because this is what's going to happen today. In this, you know, a close relative became poor. You know, if an Israelite became poor, a close relative could buy back the land and restore it to the relative. So this is what's going to happen today in our story. We talked about the Jubilee and how the prices were calculated and all that kind of stuff. So then we also talked about the law of the levirate and how, you know, if an Israelite became poor, had no heir, if he died, a close relative was to marry the widow and raise up an heir for the land. Okay, so this custom developed that connected the levirate duty to the right of redemption. Okay, and allowed the land to remain in permanent possession of the family to prevent the family name from dying out. Okay, so every family in Israel had their own land. And so this was the whole purpose of this whole concept, is to keep the land in the family. So, last night, you know, Ruth proposes. Boaz says, I'll do it. They wait until morning. As soon as it becomes sunlight, Boaz rushes Ruth off so no one will see her there in order to protect her reputation. They didn't want anything to denigrate her reputation there. And so Boaz immediately heads down to the gate, to the city gate. And that's where the business was conducted. Doesn't go home and brush his teeth, doesn't go get a cup of coffee. You know, he heads straight to the gate. So Boaz appears to be pretty motivated. Okay, and then I like what this says. Remember what the story was. Boaz said, "I will redeem you. However, there is a nearer relative, someone who is closer in line to redeem you than me." He says, if he will redeem you, fine. If not, I will redeem you. He made her that promise. So, here we are with a closer relative. And I love how subtle the Bible is here. It says, Boaz went to the gate, sat down and waited, and then it says, behold, the close relative to whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So what do you think that tells us?
It's a God thing. Yeah.
It's a God thing, you know. He could have gone to Jaffa, you know, and sitting on the seashore, you know, and getting a tan, or he could have gone down to the Dead Sea or something like that. No, but behold, he happened to be passing by that day. So I think we see the providence of God working here. And Boaz grabs him, says, turn aside, sit down here, and he sat down. And then Boaz assembles a court. And back in the day, I think apparently he needed 10 elders of the city in order to conduct business. So Boaz is assembling the court. He assembles 10 men of the elders of the city, and he invites them to sit down, and so they sit down. So we see Ruth's redemption is anticipated by Boaz. He went directly to the city gate, sat and waited, corralled the close relative, and he gathered the 10 elders of the city. So Boaz is getting everything in order to conduct business. You know, today we go down to the courthouse and we have to fill out forms and we have to wait. You know, we have to get everything done right. But back in those days, The business was conducted there at the city gate. There were no paperwork to fill out. These men were the paperwork. They were the witnesses of what was going to happen there. So now, when we went to Israel a few years ago, this is the city of Dan, actually, and so this area is the city gate. So I thought I'd give you a little visual of what this may have looked like. So the city gate is right here, and this is going into the city gate here. Now you come into the city gate, and then there was this little thing here where the ruler of the city, the king, or whoever was in charge of the city would sit. And you see these little posts here. You know, they would put this little stand over them. And I don't know if this is what was going on or not, but I thought this was interesting. So this kind of gives you a little picture of it. So the ruler's sitting here, and then the people are sitting there before him in that little spot. So here we are. We got one of our groups sitting on that little area right here, and then everybody's gathered around him. So this thing with Boaz and the elders may have looked something similar to this. This is looking back out from the city gate. This is looking into that area. You know, and they oftentimes constructed the gate this way for defensive purposes. So an invading army was trying to come in, they would hit and they would have to turn, and that would slow them down, and it was a motive of defense. So just an aside there. So here we are. Boaz and the 10 elders are sitting there, and they're going to conduct business. So then Boaz says to the nearest relative, he says, Naomi, who has come back to the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. Okay, remember, that's why we went through all this history. Naomi's got to sell the land, and somebody's got to redeem it. He said, so I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And the nearer relative says, I'll redeem it. I can always use more land. Right? Because back in the day, land meant crops. Crops meant wealth. So I'm all in. I'll buy the land. There was a limited amount of land in Israel. Remember we said Israel is about the size of New Jersey, size of Lake Michigan. So Boaz presents his case. Naomi needs to sell the land. You're first in line. If you don't, I will. So the near relative, well, I'll redeem it. But we're going to find out in a minute that he's pretty uninformed. Boaz has thought this through, but he hasn't. Didn't ask any questions. Didn't say, okay, this sounds too good to be true. Or he hadn't thought it through. So then Boaz goes, okay, fine with me. However, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess. And notice he throws in the Moabitess. Now, we talked about last week about why Boaz may have been the only man in Judah who would have even considered taking a Moabitess for his wife. And why was that?
That's what,
Rahab. And Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute. So Moab, but a woman of great faith. So Boaz did not have any qualms about taking this Moabitess for his wife. And I think that may have been one of the big reasons why. Okay, so the closest relative says, wait, time out. I can't redeem it because it would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption. He said, I cannot redeem it.
Why would it jeopardize his inheritance?
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. So Boaz, we see Boaz has a strategy here. Boaz has thought this out. It comes with a plan. Okay, so he said, he expected the near relative to say this, I'm pretty sure. Like I say, there wasn't a lot of land. If you get more land, you would increase your wealth. But he says, you have to take this, you have to take a wife, and you have to produce an heir according to the laws of the law of the levirate, the law of the kinsman redeemer. Okay, that's what all this, that's when we talk about all this stuff. That's what all this is about. So this is what's happening here. And so he says, I cannot redeem it, and I like where he says, for myself. Because he was thinking, man, this would be a great deal. And then he starts thinking about it. It jeopardized his inheritance. Then he tells Boaz, you redeem it, and you may have my right of redemption. Says, I cannot redeem it. So how would it jeopardize his estate? Well, there's a couple of things. He knew that if Ruth bore him a son, that possibly, especially if this son ended up being his only heir, there were no other children, this son would not only inherit Elimelech's land, he would inherit his land, and then his land would belong to Elimelech's family. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and it also may have been that he was fearful of marrying a Moabite, because there were prohibitions against this. In fact, God said you're not to intermarry with these people, or basically I'll take you out. And so he may have been thinking, well, Mahlon and Chilion went out to Moab, married these women, and they're dead. And so there may have been a thought, ooh, I don't want to get in on that. So he may have been fearful. Okay. Any other thoughts? Anybody have other? Okay, so now we see this custom in the former times concerning redemption and exchange of land. So a man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the matter of the attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and he removed his sandal. Okay. So we see now, at this point, the redemption is accomplished. Boaz is motivated. Boaz is faithful. He did what he told Ruth that he would do. He's calculated, and he's shrewd. So Boaz was probably not a wealthy and influential man for nothing. He's a pretty sharp fellow. Okay, so the significance of the sandal. Okay, the passing of the sandal symbolizes Boaz's right to walk on the land as his property. You know what? And I forgot my cards. I was going to hand my cards out. So, I need some volunteers. Somebody volunteer to read Genesis 13. Is that you, Daryl?
Yeah.
Okay, how about Deuteronomy 11?
Okay.
Okay. Move. Joshua? Okay. Lynn, why don't you take Joshua, and Mike, why don't you take Deuteronomy? Okay, so let's read Genesis 13, 14 through 17.
The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are to the north and the south, to the east and the west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you.
Okay, so it's telling them to walk through the land. Walk through the land on your sandal. How about Deuteronomy 11?
Then the Lord will drive out all these nations from before you, and you will dispossess nations greater and mightier than you. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your border will be from the wilderness to Lebanon, and far from the river Euphrates, as far as the western sea. No man will be able to stand before you. The Lord your God will lay the dread of you and the fear of you on all the land on which you set foot, as he has spoken to you.
Okay, so all the land you walk upon will be yours. Israel has never really occupied all the land that God's given. I think in the time of David, they came close, but they have never really, the land that they're in now really is not all the land that God promised them. And so, probably not until the millennium will they're actually gonna occupy all the land that God gave them. How about Joshua 1?
Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise to take his place. Cross over the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. I have given you every place on which the sole of your foot treads, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness of Arabia in the south, and this Lebanon in the north, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, Canaan, and as far as the great Mediterranean Sea toward the west, shall be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you to oppose you as long as you live. Just as I was present with Moses, so will I be with you. I will not fail you or abandon you.
So all the land that Joshua treaded on, God was going to give it. And once again, if you map that out, that's a pretty good. That's a lot of land that Israel has never occupied that. And we've looked at this one before, but let's look at it again because it talks about the sandal. Mike, would you read that? Deuteronomy.
If brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. And if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, and pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off.
Okay. That's pretty graphic, isn't it? I love that. You gotta love that. So, if this nearer relative was the only one, according to the law, this was in the law, we're reading from the law here, then Ruth would have been required to go to the city gate, pull off his sandal, and spit in his face. You know, but because Boaz said, I'm going to take your place, he saved this man from that humiliation. You know, so Boaz was willing. Now, one thing that Melanie brought out last week about the kinsman redeemer, it was a voluntary thing. He didn't have to do it. You know, and we see that played out this week. The nearer relative did not want to be the kinsman's redeemer. He refused, but Boaz was willing. Okay, and as Melanie talked about last week too, that because Jesus is our kinsman's redeemer, and he was willing to take and redeem us. So I think that's a big point, and I'm glad you brought that out. It's an important point. So Boaz says to the elders, to the people, you are witness today, I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have required Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased from his inheritance. Remember what we just read? In order to raise up the name of the deceased, so the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers and from the court of his birth. And said, you are my witnesses today. So, he says, I have bought from Naomi and I have acquired Ruth to be my wife. Anybody have a problem with that? Any of you ladies have a problem with being acquired? It's kind of countercultural today, isn't it? However, we have to remember that Ruth is the one who proposed. So he is only doing what Ruth asked him to do. So,
I think Naomi's the boss.
okay, so he said, I'm doing this in order to raise up the name of the deceased among his inheritors. In other words, to preserve his family land, so that the name will not be cut off from his brothers and from the court of his birthplace. He said, and all the people who were in the court said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem today. Okay, everybody remember who Rachel and Leah were? Okay, you know, remember the story of Jacob? You know, we had Jacob goes to Petarim, I can't remember that, and he comes and he meets Rachel, falls in love, works for her father for 7 years to acquire as his wife. On his wedding day, he gets so drunk, you know, he goes in and his father-in-law substitutes Leah for Rachel. He doesn't realize it consummates the marriage with her, so he ends up marrying Leah instead of Rachel. And then, what's his name? What's the father-in-law's name? Laban. Laban says, okay, well, we don't like to marry the younger sister before the older. He said, so if you work for me for another 7, then I got to give you Rachel. So he works for another 7, you know, and then there's this competition between the sisters having children. Apparently Leah's very fertile, has a bunch of sons, you know, and Rachel can't have sons at first, but she ends up having two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Dies during the birth of Benjamin. And then for a while there, neither one of them are having children, so when Leah's not having children, she gets jealous, and so she says, I'm going to give Jacob my maid, and so she has a couple of sons, and then Rachel does the same thing when she's not having children. She gives her maid to Jacob, and he has 2 sons through her, and that's where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. So, kind of a sword story. You talk about dysfunctional families.
Yeah.
I think they invented the dysfunctional family. So anyway, so they're blessing Ruth and saying, may you be as fruitful as Rachel and Leah. It said, may your house be like the house of Perez, and you can mark Judah through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Now, earlier we read the story of Tamar. Anybody remember the story of Tamar?
Judah's daughter. She was Judah's daughter.
Okay, and what happened?
She was married to his son, and he died. So then she married his next brother, and he died. So Judah promised her the third. When it came time to give her to him in marriage, he didn't do it. So she tricked him by posing as a prostitute. And she had Judah's child, which ended up in the line of.
She had twins. One of them was Perez. You know, isn't it interesting that they would look back to that? I find that interesting. I mean, that's not something that you brag about in your family, right? You know, this is forbidden in the law, by the way. You know, this was before the law, but this happened in the law. You took them out to the edge of town and threw rocks at them until they died. We're supposed to do that. I mean, man's not supposed to have relations with his daughter-in-law. Okay, so we just talked about that story there. So Boaz took Ruth. She becomes his wife. He went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. So Boaz's problem is solved. Remember what Boaz's problem was?
He was ruthless.
He's no longer ruthless. Boaz is no longer ruthless. So then the women blessed Naomi, and they said, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his fame become famous in Israel. May he also be a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons. Wow. And that's saying something. You know, so it said, may this child be famous in Israel, may be a restorer of life to you and a sustainer in your old age. So Obed also had a lot to live up to already, did he? So one purpose of a wife in ancient Israel was to bear sons for her husband. And 7 sons was considered the ultimate blessing. You know, so Ruth was a greater blessing than 7 sons. And I also think it's interesting that they're blessing this Moabite woman in this way. So, it said the redemption is applauded. So they say, may you be like Rachel and Leah. May your house be like a house of Perez. You know, God enables Ruth to conceive. And they said, God has not left you without a redeemer. And your daughter-in-law is such a blessing. So Naomi took the child, laid her in her lap, and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, so they named him Obed. He's the father of Jesse and the father of David. So Obed becomes King David's grandfather. So Ruth is King David's grandmother. And you got to wonder if, hopefully Ruth was she's pretty young at this point. So hopefully Ruth was still alive when David was born. You got to wonder what kind of influence Ruth had on King David. You know, as he was growing up. And then we have this little genealogy here. So these are the generations of Perez, once more, Perez, son of Tamar. You know, when you go all the way down to David, so that they kind of recount the genealogy here. Okay, so the redemption's amplified. Naomi's blessed, Ruth's blessed, the nation's blessed, and the world is blessed. All through this one child born to this Moabite woman. Now, this is something that I find fascinating. If we go back to Matthew 1, Matthew 1 is the genealogy of Jesus. Apparently the legal genealogy of Jesus that goes through it, Joseph. You know, so there are 40 generations laid out in Matthew 1. 40 generations. But there are only 4 women mentioned. Only 4 women mentioned in this genealogy. Tamar, we talked about. We talked about Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Okay? So, I find this fascinating. So these are, once again, there are things here that you would not brag about. Tamar was a Canaanite, got pregnant by her father-in-law. Rahab was a prostitute. Ruth was a Moabite who was supposed to be excluded for 10 generations from the house of Israel. And Bathsheba committed adultery with David. Anybody find it curious? Is this curious to you?
That's redemption.
Grace. It is. It is. You know, the Bible is often accused of denigrating women. You know, but I think the Bible elevates women. And once again, you know, the Bible elevates those that probably we would not choose. God's ways are not our ways. But God has elevated these women, like I say. They're not the ones you would expect to be in the genealogy. In fact, back in the day, women weren't even mentioned in genealogies. Because the belief back in the day, back in those days, was that women did not contribute. Women were like the land. The man planted the seed in the woman. In fact, you know, this is a drawing of what they thought, like the baby was contained within the sperm of the man, and it was planted in the woman did not contribute to the child, but just was the soil for the child to grow. And that was the concept back in the day. But God knew differently, didn't he? God knew genetics. He knew how he put all this together. So in this genealogy, God is not only elevating the women, he also trying to teach us some science that they didn't know at the time. I find that fascinating.
I think that list also shows, even from the Old Testament, that the Gentiles were always part of God's redemption plan.
Exactly. Remember we talked about just the placement of the land of Israel. God's eyes were always on the rest of the world. Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on here. Exactly. So, just to review, what made Ruth so attractive? Well, she was loyal. You see that in her treatment of Naomi. How she wouldn't leave Naomi. And she was loving. How, even when Naomi was depressed, Naomi should have been out gleaning with Ruth. But Ruth goes out, brings food to Naomi, takes care of her, shows kindness to Naomi. And even Boaz says she is a woman of excellent character. And we talked about, in the Bible, there's two books of the Bible named after women. One is Esther. Esther was a woman of extraordinary beauty, and Ruth is a woman of extraordinary character. And this is kind of what Peter was talking about in the New Testament. It says, your adornment must not be merely external, braiding of hair, wearing gold, jewelry, putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit. So the word merely here, I think, it's okay, there's some people think women aren't supposed to dress up and do that, but that's not what it's saying. So, in fact, us guys, we like it when you look nice and all that. But, we've all seen women who are very pretty, but that's all they got. There's nothing deeper. And there are men that way too. But we need to have something a little bit more than just looks. God's say. We need to have that spirit, gentle, quiet spirit, precious in the sight of God. So, let's just kind of review here in the book. What are some things that we learn about God in this little book of Ruth? Okay. First of all, I think that we see that God reveals himself to those who seek him. I think that Ruth was a seeker of God. We see that when she makes the promise to Naomi. She says, where you go, I'll go. Where you live, I'll live. Where you bury, I'll be buried. And your God will be my God. So Ruth was seeking God, and God provides for her. God is faithful to those who have faith in him. Ruth placed her faith in God, and God was faithful to her. And we see that in this book. God is merciful to us even when we're angry with him. Remember, Naomi comes back and she's mad at God. Because she's lost everything. She's lost her husband. She's lost her sons. She's extremely depressed, and she is mad at God. But God was not mad with her. God understood. He understood, her pain that she was going through. And he ended up showing her great mercy and blessing her. And this next thing I think we see is God always has a plan. And that's something I think that we forget a lot of times. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to go through a lot of this history stuff. God always had a plan. He had a plan for this piece of land. Sit there on the junction of three continents. Like I say, God's eyes were always on the world. And God's plan for ancient Israel was for all the nations. As they traveled between these continents, they were going to come through or by Israel. And so God said, stay in the land. I'll bring the nations to you, and they will see my glory in you. That was the plan. God had a plan for the poor. We talked about that. God had a plan for those who died, early and needed a plan to keep the land, in the family. He had a plan. We talked about the 7 years for the slave. God had a plan for the for the bond servants that could be released in 7 years, and a plan in the Jubilee for the land to return to those, to the families if it had to be sold. And then God has a plan for the descendants of Ruth and these other women. God always has a plan. God always has a plan. I think we learned in this book that God has a very high regard for women. I think we see that all through this book. And like we said, God has always had his eyes on the entire world. Even when it was just, the nation of Israel, God's eyes were on the rest of the world. God's grace extends for generations. We see that in his genealogies, where his grace to these women extends all the way to Christ, and even to us now through the work of Christ. And even during the darkest of times, God is working for our redemption. We talked about the book of Ruth that happened during the time of the Judges. It was one of the darkest times in the history of Israel. And it's a very difficult book to read, especially when you get in the last couple of chapters. And so if you're an Israelite during that time, you've got to be wondering, what's happening? What's God doing here? If you're a faithful person, you think, man, God's made us all these promises, and it's not going well. But God was working in this tiny little backwater place, the town of Bethlehem, which Micah calls one of the least in all of Judah. God was working for the redemption of the world in this tiny little community. And today, we're living in a time of great darkness, and it's getting darker by the day. And we look around and we think, man, what's God doing? Why's God letting all this happen? What's going on? But we got to have faith that God's working in the background. God's working. He's doing things that we don't know, that we don't see. And he's working for our redemption. Hopefully, he's working to fly us out of here pretty soon. Today, come quickly, Lord. So anything, what are some things maybe that you saw in the book of Ruth that you found interesting or
The
thought-provoking?
track of the lineage is fascinating, and how there was a lot of non-compliance with Jewish law. When you look at, and as I understand it, Jesus was the only person that's ever complied fully with Jewish law. He complied with both sides, and then he opened up the gamut for everybody. And when you look at all this from that perspective, God can take anybody and use them to his good. I mean, there were so many violations and things from our perspective, looking at the law, what makes a good person. There's a lot of people that elevate David, and yeah, he found it, but David wasn't a very nice guy. He did a lot of things wrong.
David was brutal.
And I always got, it was always a frustration to look at people that glorify David, but then you look at his life and you're going, if he can find the guy, higher God, anybody can because of what he did. But it's fascinating to look at, and to this day, in Israel, there's people that, they hold the scrolls and they track this lineage. And it's fascinating to see how that comes through. The sandal thing that was one of the questions which you explained as well, is what's the symbolization of that sandal? And there's probably some hardcore Jewish people that still do that, I don't know. It's fascinating how he can take nothing and make it into something.
I'm blown away by, early on when we talked about, remember that? Is that how you say it?
Close enough.
Making choices, we make choices. A lot of times you make wrong choices. And he chose to go to Moab. And his sons chose to marry Moabites, even though it killed them. It was against God's law. But despite all of our bad choices, God's plan still holds true. And he still works through it for his glory.
I'm super impressed with Ruth, that she was so bold at a time when boldness was not admired in women, and she wouldn't take no for an answer, even from her mother-in-law, who tried to send her back, but she knew the right way to go, and she did it. And then she received instruction that she didn't just sit around and wait. She worked so hard to provide, and then she was bold enough to go and sit at his feet in the middle of the night. It's wild.
She's kind of interesting. There's a couple of things there, you know. She's incredibly bold. I mean, they walked, she said, I'm not leaving you. So they walked 40 miles, you know, through the wilderness to robbers, bandits, and all kind of stuff to go with Naomi. But yet, when she was dealing, you know, when she interacts with Boaz, she's so humble. She's so humble and unassuming. And interesting. A lot of times those two things don't seem to go together. What? Once again, woman, incredible character.
I think it's interesting that the first kinsman redeemer really exemplifies today's Christian. I mean, he was a Jew, he knew the law, he believed in the law, and he was like, oh yeah, I'll do that. You know, because that's required of me, I understand that. But then the minute that it affected him personally, it's like, oh wait. And I think Christians are so like that, you know, I totally believe the Bible, and I get it, and I want to serve God, and I want to please him, and oh, but wait, it's going to cost me something? Never mind.
Well, Jesus told us to count the cost. Anything else? Well, thanks for having me these past few weeks. I mean, it's been fun. It's a great book to teach. There's so much, and you know, we see Jesus all over this book. You know, like once again, like Andy Stanley. I don't know if he is. Andy Stanley says we don't need the Old Testament anymore. No need to study the Old Testament. I don't get it, because Jesus is everywhere in the Old Testament. And Jesus, this book is just, everything in this book points to Jesus, the redemption, you know, Ruth being the single person who has no hope, no rights, no hope. The kinsman redeemer comes along, restores her, redeems her, gives her hope, blesses her, brings her into his family. Jesus everywhere in this book.
You can't know that Jesus is really the Messiah without the Old Testament.
Right.
You know, and once again, one thing I like to say is that the Old Testament is oftentimes pictures of New Testament principles, and that's what I think the book of Ruth is. It's just stories that illustrate New Testament principles. It's just.
To me, the story embodies that picture of what the bride of Christ is.
What a blessing. Okay, let's pray and we'll be done. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for your word, just the richness of your word. And there's so much there, and so much you want us to know, and so much when we delve into it, we see your grace, your mercy, and redemption. You know, I thank you for this story. I thank you for the lives of these people and the witness they are to us, and that here 3,000 years later we can still learn from their lives, which is the glory and the beauty of your word, how when you get at that, look at that, we can learn about you, and we see how you are so clearly illustrated in these stories in your word, and I thank you for that. I thank you that you've given us this great resource that we can study and learn about you. And I pray that you'd make us like these people. I pray you'd make us faithful loving and kind and gentle, you know, and looking to others to find ways that we can help them be. Thank you, we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.